So the first question I'm going to ask is October 23rd, the elections for President, Congress, Senate are coming up in November 5th.
I think we just got a speaker.
He's got, but he may or may, this question he may not be able to comment on. You should come up, but you will not want to answer this question.
Right.
Yeah. There will be other questions that you can ask, but you won't ask. I can predict. So obviously, with the elections coming up, there are a lot of things happening. One is we will have a new president, but also we'll have a different Congress and Senate. It's not just the presidential election, Senate, but also there will inevitably, usually with a change in administration, there are changes in policy related to NIH, FDA, drug policies, Obamacare, all sorts of things, right? So I'm going to ask anyone who wants to comment, which is, what are the areas that are likely to have some change, right, after the elections? And again, not just president, because, I'm also talking about Congress, et cetera. What do you think the upcoming elections, what impact do you think will have on the industry?
So I'll just start.
Here's the brave person of the group.
So regardless of our opinion about individuals, whether they are calm and placid and others being more excitable or whatever, I think it's a known fact that President Trump understands markets. He has run a business, and I think it's probably good for the U.S. because the preemptive industry in the U.S. is life sciences, and some of our politicians don't understand that. If we had been a preemptive industry in China, our politicians would have supported this industry. The amount of savings on this IRA are very little, $7 billion last year, and destroying the confidence in spending money on R&D for the future is not a good idea. So whatever our opinion might be about the individuals, it would be good to have a pro-market person as the president. There are other aspects here that, of course, people would have their own opinion about. And also, the IRA has absurdities that nobody among the politicians can answer the question, how come small molecules are 9 years and big molecules get 13 years, and small molecules are cheaper for society than big molecules? There's not one politician who comes forward to explain that.
What the huh? With that? No? Okay, sure.
Well, yeah, the IRA is huge, and we just take an objective view on it. Well, we hear that sentiment a lot as well. For companies, it's the cost savings. I mean, the savings to patients might be very little, but our interest is how is it going to affect pharma and biotech strategy. As far as access, I mean, a big focus of ours is market access. So I mean, it sounds like it's just going to really, it's going to be an uncertain kind of reimbursement climate. You agree for a while?
I'll just say one thing. I haven't seen any change in a VC's point of view on whether they're investing in a small molecule or a biotech. That's all I'll say. So all the noise about the IRA, which I understand politically, I haven't seen a net decrease in attraction to small molecules versus biotech.
I mean, I think from a pharma or biotech perspective, at least I could say from a pharma perspective, folks are thinking about how many indications, indication sequencing. Also, do you go back, if you're early in development, do you go back and actually have a unique scaffold so you don't have to worry about it? Like there are, I would say backup strategies, but honestly, I think in the beginning it was like, this is going to completely change things. And now it's a little bit more muted. I think it's different for biotechs. Recently what I've seen is there's a huge concern if you have rare diseases, Do you want to go for multiple indications? And I just think that to Fred's point, it's so hard to make a drug, right? Like it's one of the most humbling things to discover and develop a medicine. Do you really want to put more guardrails? I think the real question is why does it cost so much in the US, the same drug as Europe or ex-US? And that's a very different conversation. That's a very different conversation to have. And then there's other costs at play, right? Whether it's therapeutics at 14–15%. And when I look at either candidates, nobody's really focusing on the holistic problem to solve. It's really easy to have a single throat to choke, but you're not really solving the problem, and then you just have less innovation. And we're one of the very few countries that actually have that. So I get depressed when I see either.
So this is a pattern around the world. As I said earlier, healthcare budgets are under stress, including this country. And when governments have to make choices, they go after the drug companies because they are easier to go after than hospitals and doctors because of the local politics. And this is a bit of a tragedy because the best opportunity to innovate in the next several decades is really in the drug industry. It can actually bring down the cost of healthcare.
You know, I don't disagree, and what I have seen, even from not some at FDA, is and some on both sides of the aisle is a recognition that there are aspects of the IRA that are just really anti innovation that need to potentially be addressed. So I have my suspicion that no matter who has control of Congress, there'll probably be something in this area because I think both sides of the aisle understand that there's some very perverse incentives here. And I would put it to you that there are also enough people in Congress that understand that the pharma bio is an area that we have as a national strength that it would be a shame to see us kind of have that offshore, so to speak. So yeah.
Thank you. Before I go to my next question, I just make one comment, which is one of my pet peeves is the US, the FDA does a terrific job, you know, at evaluating drugs, proving and make sure they're safe. But I think the sad comment structurally from a global point of view is two things. One is the US consumer is subsidizing overseas patients, you know, and the other is the FDA does such a great job. Many countries, they're not willing to quite admit it, is they piggyback off the FDA, right? And so the US healthcare costs in part it's a sad thing, but we're paying a lot, we're subsidizing a lot of the patients around the world, but also the FDA is doing a lot of the work for a lot of countries that, you know, I mean, you can't blame them.
Yeah, but that's something I don't mind us doing, right?
No, I understand that.
I think it's goodwill. If it's like an industry, it's like the Better Business Bureau. We're here to help because if we can help our ecosystem, you know, by providing good reviews that other countries can get these products on the market more rapidly. It actually is good for it's good for business here in terms of having a robust market. So I don't mind. That's been the attitude that we've had, which is we're happy to share, you know, to the extent that we can share. I don't view that necessarily as freeloading.
Yeah, no, and I didn't mean it as bad. It's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, we do all sorts of things, help other countries that we don't get bad. We get foreign aid, we do all sorts of things that benefit them, but I don't necessarily consider that bad. I think it's more an economic issue, which is, say, certain countries, their patients get subsidized by US, but then their governments, their budgets don't have to, you know, be as high on the regulatory side. It's not that the second one I'm not that concerned about. The first one's really
No,
big.
it is.
The first one is a big problem, right?
It's a really interesting. Yeah, that's one.
Yeah. Now the next question is this. There has been a great deal of discussion about the rising competition between the West and Asia, but principally India and China. And in particular, China is making rapid progress in development of drug, getting to final dosage as opposed to just, APIs and so forth. And in fact, they declared biotech as one of the 5 industries, when they said industry 2025, right? That they were going to use industrial policies to try to get ahead. So I guess, and so there's serious competition. India is also serious competition. So I'd like any of you to comment on where do you think this is going to head, right? I personally don't know who's going to be the winner or loser. I know the US and the West has a big lead, right? But also China and India are both putting a lot of energy and government money into that. So where do you think things are headed over the next 5, 10, 20 years between China, India, and the West, particularly the US?
I think it has to do in part with the choices we make, right? Go ahead, please, you're better.
Yeah, so I was in China last year. I met a lot of entrepreneurs. It's truly remarkable but 10 years ago, if you looked at the number of INDs they had at ASCO, literally 0. And last year, about half of the pre-phase one was Chinese origin. It's remarkable how fast they've come up, but they have a 5-year plan to become a very strong challenger to the US. It's clearly a stated 5-year plan. And they seem to have come along very nicely because they have tremendous brain power and a lot of returning brain power from the US, trained by multinational companies. So they are following their policy and doing very well, especially in cancer, especially in ADCs. They're doing remarkably well, and CAR T. So they're actually finding certain corridors and excelling in those areas. India is catching up pretty fast, but it's not like China. China is coming along very fast.
I agree, and I think that one of India's problems that we've seen over the years is that it kind of fits and starts. It's even like their manufacturing. They can make something well for a year or 2, and then they have problems. It's sustainable quality management in India that's been a challenge, I think, at the pharma side. Not that they don't want to. I mean, they want to move in this area. It's been hard. I agree with you that China it's been amazing to watch. I mean, especially with their CAR T development, et cetera. It's why I think that some of our opportunity here in the US is to really lean into some of the directly administered gene therapies where we actually do have a tremendous amount of know-how and really move ahead there. It's a huge opportunity, I think, if we were to fill that space. So I think some of who's going to win this battle depends on where we put investment here and whether it's hospitable to move these things forward rapidly. So that's part of what we're trying to do with brain groups.
And maybe I couldn't agree more, just to build on that, like the last 6 months though, like take China as an example, there has been a little bit of aggression that you start to see, but there's so many companies, great molecules, but policies, politics, whatever piece, it's sad to see that there's actually an aggression. I've met a lot of entrepreneurs that it's really hard to raise, et cetera, and they're having to out license things that they wouldn't have. So I just worry just from a global innovation. I think you start to see a little bit of regression. I think South Korea is also really picking up significantly. It's really good to see it. It's high tech stuff. The other I would say for India, it's so sad. It's like it goes back and forth, but they're actually having a tailwind? Yes, a tailwind in terms of some US companies thinking about, APIs, drug product, and just overall contracting, CRO shifting more to India, where the Syngenes of the world and others. So there's a different type of sort of volume that, pharma companies and now even some biotechs are starting to do, just given the challenges being associated with certain companies in China. That's also a shame, but what we start to see is as they're getting more of that volume, they're having to make strategic choices on, do I get deeper in one area or do I vertically stack up? And so you see a strategic shift there happening as well. There's actually more and more folks that are coming back from the US who are trained in the US, similar to what you saw in China in the last decade, and hopefully the quality will be better and sustainable. We will see.
I spent 5 years running a company in China where after FDA approval, we were then financing a big pharma's drug into the China market. Because without the FDA approval, the CTA process. But what I can tell you is in the time I spent there, I went there 18 years ago for the first time till now. China's a long-term player, period, in everything, not just pharma.
Yeah.
I mean, they are globally.
Batteries, electric cars, whatever.
You name the area, they are in it for the global long-term play. So to think they're not gonna be dominant is being naive. I mean, I think we need to keep our edge and keep going. But the relationship that we have with China, when people say, we're gonna tariff them, we're gonna do that, this is insanity. This is insanity. The dependence we have on that country is huge. You would not have your phones on this table today if we didn't have China, right? So anyone being naive and saying we can beat them, we can dominate them, 20 years from now, let's see where we are. I mean, they're committed. The government's committed. The government, I went there, I'm like, I was going around the first time, I was like, oh, that's amazing. He said, yeah, like we're gonna spend $20 billion in the next blah, blah, build. I'm like, what? Yeah, he goes, no, yeah, that's just a drop in the bucket. So we don't even, here in the US, we don't really understand the energy and the intellect that you get trained here, went back there, and now we will have drugs that we will use that come from China.
Yeah, and I want to make two comments. One is, I have so many friends who are from India, and so forth. In India, to mirror really what you're saying, it's a sad case where, it's not a Ferrari, but maybe it's a F-150, but 15 years ago it was an F-150 with one tire. And then, because, something's not working, the electricity, whatever. Then they went to two tires. Now I think they're an F-150 with three tires, but they're still missing one tire. So that's kind of the history of India. It's always been like on the verge. I will comment about the China issue, and that is, they're going to be serious competition. And I think the only way China does not ultimately succeed is if they, in other parts of the Chinese economy, the real estate, or that they implode for that reason, but it won't be because they aren't successful in biotech and batteries and so forth. And the other sad thing about the US, you mentioned about they come here, they study, they go back. Well, it wasn't that way. It used to be Chinese would come here, they would study, they go to MIT, and they stayed, right? They stayed. But what the government has done with the China Initiative and so forth, they had prosecuted 250 Chinese scientists, not just in biotech, but in a lot of different. There's, I think, only one case or two cases that actually they proved the person did. There was a poor woman who worked for the National Weather Bureau, and she was accused of spying. And it's because, and the co-worker said that because she worked late, so she must be spying. It actually she went 3-year fight, and finally they dropped the case. So what's happening though is by the way, anti-China is the only bipartisan thing these days, right? That's the only thing that Democrats and the Republicans agree on. And it's right to worry about China, but some of the things they're doing, and they shut down the China Initiative thing, and then they restarted again. So what's happening is all these really smart Chinese students, they come, they study, and then they're going back, not because they think it's going to be great in China, it's just they think it's worse to stay here. So that we're doing it. The last is really what you're saying. It's not that the Chinese have very good, thoughtful industrial policy. And they have a system by which the people in government are the people who are the best academically. So when they have a system, we have to take a test and so forth. That's not true in this country. But when they do an industrial policy, they're not perfect, but they really thought it through. we do industrial, we attempt to do industrial policy, but they're all flawed, like.
Yeah, but they don't have their ass kicked.
Right.
They just do it. We live in a democratic society, so it's not necessarily all roses where they are. But they're a closed system, they're not gonna fail and go safe, they'll just keep pouring money. I mean, I don't think people understand the closed system of China, and that's why it's successful. It's
But-
not a democratic society.
But I understand it, but I'm saying in terms of our industrial policy, often it's not structured properly. It's unrealistic about whether you can really onshore something, whether really have the skills. I mean, they're trying to build semiconductor plants up in upstate New York. But they can't find the skilled labor to do it. And so they got the money from the government, but they're struggling. And these are plants that are built by companies like Taiwan, semiconductors and so forth. So it's going to be very, it's going to be very complicated. I guess the last question I'm going to ask, and then I'm going to allow everyone to go home and catch early trains, right? Is, what are the new challenges that you think biotech and pharma are going to be facing that we're not thinking about today? I mean, there's some that we all that develop a lot of publicity, the cost of developing drugs, so forth. Are there any ones, as you put your crystal ball, you take a look at your crystal ball, are there any things that you can see that are going to be challenges that we're not focused on right now? Any?
So just as a starter, I think it's the workforce of the future. I think we're now at a stage, as we heard from Najat, about being bilingual in R&D, understand your real stuff and then understand data science. I would even volunteer that in some ways one needs to be trilingual. So if you're in marketing, you should understand sales, you should understand data and make it all work. Getting this thing about getting into the minds cross-functionally and working in that manner is extremely important. But pharma's historical strength has been very silo-based. And we're now going to the age of silos of becoming obsolete. But the big challenge is, are we going to get that workforce of the future that can work in a silo-free environment?
I'm just gonna build on that, because it's funny, I was talking to somebody about being trilingual. And it's the computer science, it's whatever your domain is, it can be marketing, it can be, discovery, but it's also like good leadership skills. I mean, somebody mentioned, like, there's so many companies that don't work. Let's take tech bio companies as an example. If you look at the choices of programs that they go after, I'm like, why would you do that? You have to have a very high bar in terms of what gets through, and that high bar is dependent on probability of scientific commercial success. But then also, just because you see a signature doesn't mean it's enough. You haven't validated it enough and you're rushing it through. So I do think that leadership component, especially in R&D, we don't really teach folks. We teach folks, we promote based on how good you are as a scientist, not how good you are as a leader strategically. I think that strategic element is often missing. The other thing I was also going to say is the pace is changing. And in some ways, the fact that, and I'm not gonna name names, but like, I've had many people tell me that, why do you worry about this so much? Like, just slow down. Like, it takes 5 years anyways to get a drug to into the clinic, and then another 5, 6, 7 years. I think that pace is starting to change, because the amount of science, whether it's from China, US, and the amount of knowledge you have to have, or even on the commercial side, because the whole ecosystem is changing. I think the pace is evolving really, really quickly. So how do you work smarter is going to become more and more important going forward. And that some of it could be, like you were saying, ChatGPT, you need to know all of the various papers, but some of it is also like working better on your feet. And that's not something that we train the workforce for. And if you don't, then someone can just replace that person with an analyst using a search engine. And yes, it hallucinates, but so do analysts. They'll all make errors. Where is it worse? Where does it cost more? And who never complains on a Saturday or Sunday when you ask any questions? I'm being facetious here, but I do think there's a piece around pacing that we have to think about that's evolving.
I think the one thing that I asking for things that kind of are out of left field. I think one of the things that I see is that as we make these more complicated biologic therapies that are biologic drugs, device combinations, the delivery of these things is going to become more of a challenge because it's patient experience of the product is going to be so intertwined with the delivery that it's going to be a challenge, right? Because you, as the person marketing the product, are going to actually have a vested interest in something we typically haven't, right? I mean, yeah, you haven't cared how clean, and before the pharma rep didn't come and say, yo, doc, your office is pretty dirty, you know, it's not a great place to prescribe. Here, actually, this actually will be, I think, the delivery, how that's set up is going to actually reflect directly on that. That's why it's worthwhile actually looking, anyone who saw New York Times yesterday on the Lyfgenia story from it's just, it reflects, you see how the delivery actually is intimately involved. Now that's an extreme case, but I do think it's something we're gonna have to think about as we deal with how do you develop your therapy so that the delivery end is smooth and slides in.
I have one more. I'll make a positive comment, which is.
Oh, but some of these are positive.
Yeah.
Come on, you're not the only positive.
No, but I can say is, the phone may one day be obsolete, but our industry will not be obsolete. We just, unfortunately, we're never gonna solve these diseases, cure them. We're gonna keep iterating, at least in my lifetimes, probably in my kids or grandkids, if I ever have them, lifetimes. You know, I just think ever evolving diseases, new issues. So the good news for our industry, we're here still, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. And it just, how it changes, I can't predict. But overall, no one's, big pharma is going away.
Yeah, and I'm optimistic about the long-term success of biotech and pharma for your reasons. There's a need, it's a big one and so forth. Do I worry about how we get there and the bumps along the road? Yes. But I will make one comment on, I gave a speech in a big conference and someone asked a question, are there any examples where there was an unanticipated sea change that dramatically changed either geopolitical or others? And I said, I'll give you one example that's happening right now. All the military, Chinese military, US military, so forth, they're all based around the concept of ships, battleships, submarines, aircraft carriers. US projects its power by sending in the Asia by sending aircraft carriers. Well, the big shock is, guess what? Ukraine and Russia is showing that drones now are king. Drones rather are king. And it's happened before. So for example, 100 years ago, the latest technology was cavalry, because they were fast, they could move around, they could go around you, they could surround you, whatever. Until they invented barbed wire. And it killed the entire concept of cavalry, right? And right now, the US military is saying, holy crap. Our ability to defend aircraft carriers and everything else and so forth is limited. When you look at in Israel, so forth, a whole bunch of drones attacked, Netanyahu's, house. The anti-aircraft, the anti-missile aircraft system in Israel, Iron Dome, was not designed to shoot down drones that cost 10,000 each, right? So all the militaries are in a panic because the whole basis of their whole strategy and US military power and everything is based on expensive jets that cost 30 million, whatever it is. So you're going to see, I mean, the good news is we're not in the military equipment business, right? Right. But there is an example of where there could be a sea change that dramatically changes the relative power of the military power among different, and by the way, in cyber warfare, right? For example, right, is another example. But there was one question over there, so we have time for one question. And by the way, it's amazing how many people are still here. I mean, we have 80% of the people who arrive. It's amazing. So either you guys are great. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. I was gonna raise the question about, cultural differences in anti-China policies. And even a small biotech company, having a multicultural people, I see we have a couple of Chinese colleagues, but I see anti-Chinese sentiment against those colleagues. So, but that didn't exist before, okay? So it's a big question, and that was the question I wanted to ask. But I think there is an elephant in the room that nobody's talking about, which you just started touching. And that is the geopolitical war that is going on and the impact that it will have on the world economy. But I have a specific question. I just want to raise that. That's the elephant in the room. And the press doesn't talk about it, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, whatever, CBS. But leave that aside with all the killing that is going on, both in Ukraine and in the Middle East. It's sad. It's sad. You talk to anyone and they say, oh, we see pictures. Horrible. I was driving to, I live outside.
Your question, you have to get to a
So
question.
the question is, the GLP agonist.
Yeah.
I think there is a word coming out that is going to lead to massive sarcopenic obesity. And the question is, what are the social and legal implications of that on pharma?
You want on it?
I'll be happy. Okay. I think that's a very good question, and as you've heard from Regeneron, if somebody over the age of 65 loses 30 pounds, 10 pounds might be very good pounds that do get lost to bones. Anyway, so there's a whole bunch of projects in the pipeline. That's where pharma is very innovative and moves very fast. So we've heard about these new molecules coming along, especially from Regeneron. And I think that's gonna supplement GLP-1s. But in the meantime, the long-term safety data, and I'm sure we can hear from Peter, is very reassuring. This category has been monitored in great detail, with liraglutide as being the first weight loss product that got approved as Saxenda, and now semaglutide. So the database is very large here, and it's true that there will be need for new supplemental drugs, but really the baseline is only looking better and better in terms of reducing heart attacks, strokes, kidney, even CNS. So overall, it looks very good.
No, I think you said it. Sometimes our commissioner sounds like he's a cardiologist.
So I want to advise, first of all, I want to thank all of our speakers. I think we would all unanimously say we've had a wonderful set of speakers. And our objective with these is to have all the audience come away and the speakers as well, saying, I learned a couple of things that really matter, either with the company I'm with or my way of thinking. And I hope everyone comes away with that, because that's the goal here. Certainly don't forget about Younger Partners if you have a strategic or investment banking issue you want to deal with. But the others, I want to say that what we always do, which usually kills us to have, is we do a summary of the speeches, and we'll send it to all of you, but also the summaries of all of the conferences going back, 12, 15 years are on our website. So if you want to know what Peter Marks said 3 years ago, or whatever, or Dr. Spielberg said, is back there. And it's kind of actually interesting to see what the issues were 5 years ago and 10 years ago. But you will get summaries of those. But I do hope that all of you really enjoyed the day. And the food's good, by the way, you know, and there's still one or two tiramisus there, so you could have before you leave. So thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to see you at the 21st annual Pharmaceutical Executive Summit.